Testing. There we go. Okay. Well, we are in our exciting study on truth. And did you realize that faith without truth is no faith? Truth and faith are synonymous, and truth is faith. And without faith, you can't have truth, and faith is truth. Without faith, you can't have truth, and without truth, you can't have faith. Have I confused you yet? So the study might be about faith and truth, do you think? Was I yammering about those things so you could establish in your mind that it's important that we bear down on the truth? I heard lots and lots of Christian carnal teaching about it's all about your choices. Have anybody hear that? Anybody believe that? It's not what the Bible says. You can make all the choices you want. But it's you making the choices. And you can't make a good choice unless, of course, you're hearing God, walking with God, and knowing God. Therefore, God gave them over to the lust of their hearts of impurity, so that their bodies would be dishonored to man. They exchanged the truth of God for a lie. Once we exchange the truth of God for a lie, which many pseudo-Christians do that, now because they cast down what God said, now in no area in their life can they make a right decision. Do you understand? So if we're talking about the carnal world, it's not about choices. Unless it's the only choice that there is God, what do you say? And that's what I'll do. Or any choice that you make will always turn out bad. Do you understand? If it's your carnal mind and Satan thinking, I don't care how wise you are, how many paraplegics do we have graduated from college? Paraplegics. They can't make a good decision, can't find truth, trained in lies. Can they make a good decision or a good choice? So choice is not about I get to choose this or that. Choice is, God, I want to learn about you and I want to do it your way. If I don't, he turns me over to a lie, so I cannot, no matter what choice I make. It may turn out really good. You may get the big Riviera cruise boat and all that stuff, but I promise you people that won the lottery end up absolutely shipwrecked. Even though they had millions and millions of dollars, it's gone overnight. You can't make a good choice without God. And God's not going to help you make your fleshly choices. Now, the reason I'm throwing this in the circle is because we're in our study of truth, and I often hear people, it's all about choices, and they tell their kids it's all about choices, and just make sure to make a good choice. If the person is not walking with God, doing it God's way, they cannot make a good choice. The reprobate mind, that God speaks about here, is a mind that can't find anything good. It will always base its knowledge and base its decisions off the tree of good and evil. So our study in this session is we're looking at Abraham as a result of him being the father of faith. How was he able to do that? How did he become that? What was the revelation that God sent in our study so far? Because he's used as the example. We're engrafted into the promises of Abraham, and some of those promises are, my goodness, they are brilliant promises. And it's not all cluttered up with the law. Now, do you speculate at a stop sign. It's whether you want to stop or not. Do you do California stop? That's where you, okay. It's slow enough that you can observe that nothing's going to run you over and you can go on. That's called a California stop. Unfortunately, I'm not the greatest driver in the world, but I have someone that helps me. I appreciate that very much. I need all the help I can get. Some things we're not so good in, and it's just because we're just used to getting there, right? We got to get there. Doesn't matter what we run over. Doesn't matter the shortcuts. I'm not talking about trying to offend anybody. And anybody ever see that old cartoon from Walt Disney where Goofy comes out and he's got a car and he's this real gentle guy walking with a tie and all that stuff, and he gets into his car and he transforms into a devil with horns. You remember that? I'm not going to say I saw y'all sometime. But you might say to me, I saw you. Our mind goes into a different world when we get into our functioning grid of what we think would be acceptable. When there's road signs everywhere that tells you what's acceptable. Now, how often do you see those? You know, I was in France driving, and I was in a 6-lane freeway, and I'm on the 4th lane over or 3rd lane over, and people are behind me and they won't go around. They're honking, and I didn't know what the sign said, but I don't know why they were upset. All the other lanes were open. Just go around, Look, honey, they're 3 feet off my bumper. I couldn't read the signs. I found out later that, the outside lane is supposed to be like for 120 miles an hour, and the next one's for 110, and I think I'm in a 100-mile-an-hour lane, and I think 70 is plenty good, But, I couldn't read the signs. Now, I can't say I was innocent. I really didn't care what the sign said. I was just weaving in and out and just kind of blending. How many of you are a blender driver? It didn't matter about the signs. You just kind of blend in with what the traffic is doing. Unless, of course, it slows down too much. Now we're going to modify that. Well, that's the way we kind of approach life, because we think the getting there is the thing, and God's not interested in us getting there. He's interested in us walking with him. There's some time I've been in a hurry and get to the other side of town, and he said, if you hadn't driven so fast, I had 2 or 3 lights. I was going to stop you because I had some things to say. But you were in a hurry, so it really bears down hard on me, because if you can truly hear the Lord, I just missed maybe 3 sessions of something amazing that I could have heard. And Abraham was one of those men that heard God. And I think that's not it. There we go. We've looked at Abraham and we looked at Lot, and if you weren't here Sunday night, we further discussed Lot. That Lot, when they came back, you remember when they went down to Egypt, they got thrown out pretty quick. There was a famine, remember, in the land? And they come back to the land just a couple of months later after being booted out of Egypt, and escorted out with armed guard, no less. And there's still a famine on. And so Lot's herdsman gets in a tizzy with Abraham's herdsman, and there's all this fighting. And Lot, who's a nephew, traveling, comes up and starts arguing and emotionally leaning on a man that's real gentle and kind and lovely, but also direct, but starts leaning on him emotionally. Well, your herdsman said, and it's not right, I got 2 guys that are 20 miles out that direction. Your guys are 10 miles out. And now, you realize Abraham took him to this land, and because Abraham was there, God put a blessing on Abraham, not on Lot. But because Lot was with Abraham, Lot was blessed. When I say blessed, how about instead of one lamb, your lamb gives two or three? I mean, there was a multiplication process that was phenomenal. And so they had thousands of animals. And now, think about this. If you owned 1,000 head of sheep, and they're just mowing grass out there, it's like a bank. You know, each one of those critters are worth probably about, I don't know, $110 a piece right now. You got 1,000 of those. How much cash do you have just standing out there? $110,000. Anybody do the math right quick? So that's just with 1,000 head of sheep. And you know, if you got cattle, how much is a nice beef steak worth? You know, a couple $1,000 now on the hoof, I would think. Our farmer lady's not here to tell us, but I think so. Suppose you had 500 cows. Now you got the milk products, the cream products, the cheese products, the dairy products, and the meat products, and at a couple $1,000 a piece. And do you see? I'm just talking about big cash register things that you didn't have to keep in the vault down to bank, and they just multiply every year. Herd doubles every year. That happened because Lot was with a man of God that was blessed. And when Lot raised himself up and wanted to argue and fuss and fight and create commotion, he spiritually thought he was higher than. Why? Because Abraham had probably nearly 1,000 people that moved around with him. I speculate about that because we know there was 318 soldiers, right? And each one of those probably had a wife, if they're old enough to fight. How many does that make? We're up to 636, y'all doing your math. And each one of them, if we just gave them one kid, now we're up to 1,000 people. But these people weren't too busy. They were out in the desert, not too many things to do. So they had like probably 12 to 30 kids apiece. It was in the water. They said, wait a minute, they were in the desert. How was it in the water? So yeah, anyway, I like kind of to get some numbers in my head. It was a moving city. And Abraham was the judge over that. He was the king over that. His word was life and death. That's the power of kings back then. And here comes Lot, and he's raised himself up spiritually above Abraham, a man of God. He was not a man of God, but because he was with a man of God so much, he was saturated with righteousness because of the righteousness of God that walked with Abraham. And he also got confused because, I remember when we were there at the tree, the oak tree, and God showed up. I was there. Well, I was down when we built that altar, and God showed up there. God didn't show up for him. He showed up for the man of God. But because Lot saw those things or heard those things, he assumed that he was religiously in charge, and we see him taking his place down at the gates of Sodom, trying to be king. He sat at the gate so he could be judge. He set himself up as a judge over everybody that was there. That's what a judge did. They would sit in judgment at the gate of the city so that they would judge all matters. People would come up with an argument. Well, you're right and you're not. You pay them this. Now, he wasn't that. And the reason I'm saying this is because we labored about Lot last time, and this time we're going to rescue Lot. It seems like those who like to walk on the dark side and don't like to do things that God says or men of God says or Scripture says, they're always the ones in trouble and always the ones that cost you your retirement money or cost you one of your cars or cost you, they're always pulling from you. But they never realize that, wait a minute, that's God's money. why don't you have that money? Why? So people who walk in the shade or in the dark areas of life will always cost others money, including family. If you got one member that doesn't want to do it right, they're going to cost lots of money. But my point with Lot is that he raised himself up in a religious level and did not want Abraham over him. And we look at the end of his life, he loses absolutely everything. He has a reprobate mind. And the big question I posed Sunday night was, why didn't he just go back to Abraham? Why didn't he go back and submit and say, you're the man of God, I'm not. You're the one that knows the right things, I don't. But because he was there and saw those experiences, I'm sure he had his 9 o'clock Bible study, and I'm sure he did his prayers, and I'm sure he assumed that he was in leadership position. We see that down at Sodom. So with that in mind, now that's going to happen a little bit later on. No, it just happened. He went down there, and he's down there, and he's got his tent fixed, and he's right in front of the gates watching all the wicked things go on, and finally makes himself judge, but not king. We'll find out it's got a king. So Abraham goes out, and he's through the land, and he went back up to Miramar, which is an area where the great oaks were at. I showed you some pictures of the great oak trees. Matter of fact, the one that Abraham camped under is almost dead. It's got 2 twigs coming out of the ground now. But if pictures in the 1800s that I showed you, boy, it was 150 feet high and 150 feet across it. And you could put your tent, and the leaves would be about 60 feet in the air above you, which means the desert sun got absorbed in those leaves, and the sun never hit the ground under those big trees, and which would make it much cooler. So the reason I'm talking about Abraham is because he's the father of faith for us, and we're engrafted into the promises to him. But many people feel like, well, I'm not Abraham. I know why God picked him. He was perfect. No, God picked him so he could give us an example of reaching down blindfolded and saying, okay, this one, I'll do something with this one. Now, that's encouraging, because I can be engrafted into him in my humanness, and he can transform me. See, he transformed Abraham. He transformed him that once again mankind on earth could be a bearer of God's Spirit. Remember, man in the garden lost the indwelling of the Holy Spirit. God said, the day you eat of that fruit, you'll surely die. But yet we know his brain kept living on, his body kept living on. What died in him? God's not a liar. Matter of fact, the Scripture says all men are liars. How many liars are here? And the reason being is because we don't walk in God's whole truth. So with that, let's get on with tonight's drama. Now, this is Genesis chapter 14, and it came about in the days of Amraphel, king of Shinar. Now, Shinar is the land that Nimrod ruled. He raised up about 10 cities. The giant Nimrod that was like 22 feet high. He was one of the Raphamim. And Arok, king of Eleazar, and Chedorlaomer, king of Elam. Thank you. And he was the title king of Goam. So we have these different kings, and if I had a map of the area, anybody know where the Persian Gulf is? On the other side of the Persian Gulf, not the Red Sea, the Persian Gulf, You have the river Euphrates that comes down, and then you have the Tigris River that comes down. On the other side of the Tigris River is the land of Elam. Matter of fact, anybody ever hear of Susa? That it was right there in Elam. And so these were different empires. They hadn't consolidated into the Babylonian Empire. They hadn't consolidated into the Assyrian or the Persian, or they did eventually by raising up armies. But this Chadlamir, king of Elam, he was a title king of Goan. You know what Goan is? It's the nations. So all the rest of these kings are subject to him, and he's getting taxation from them and letting them run their kingdoms. So he did the same thing to them that he's doing to these other cities that are over in Canaan. Now, most societies in the Persian region or in Egypt they were sophisticated societies, but it was more caveman style when you got over to Canaan. It was just tribes fighting against tribes, and kind of like Scotland was. You're not laughing. You never heard of the fighting Scots, that they were constantly, clans were fighting against each other and warring against it? Well, it was that way there with the Canaanites there and the Pezerites there, all the ites. I mean, there's a whole bunch of ites hanging around that were constantly fighting. I'm rattling here, so it said they made war with Bera, king of Sodom. So all of a sudden we know the name of the king that's there in Sodom, that Lot's sitting at the gate. And Beresha, king of Gomorrah. See, it had its own king too. And you might remember that because they end up in some tar pits here in a little bit. And Senabad, king of Admah, and Shimber, king of Zeboim, and the king of Bela, and that's Zor. Now these are the 5 cities that are at the end of the Dead Sea. As a matter of fact, that end of the Dead Sea, that whole section for the bottom of the Dead Sea for about 50 miles south is covered with the sulfur, where all the fire was rained on those areas to kill everybody and everything in those cities. And so these kings are coming, and they're going to make war, but they also have something else in mind. You remember, Nimrod had ruled. He was an absolute murderer. He was a giant. And anybody that worshipped God, he would go hunt them down and kill them. But he killed anybody else that didn't obey his rule. He was the most vicious killer to come along. And they made war. We read that. And all of these came as allies. So there's a list of... My mouse is moving. I'm not moving it. Frank, can you stop? Thank you. Okay, here we go. These all came as allies to the valley of Siddim. Now, the valley of Siddim, you remember where Jericho is? And there's another city that's across. You remember the date groves and the acacia trees where Moses camped before they went in? That lower valley is called the Valley of Siddim. If you just for location. It's amazing how many things happen in history in some of the same places over and over. And all these allies came to the Valley of Siddim. That's the Salt Sea. So they're at the top of the Jordan when it runs into the sea. And for 12 years, they served this Chadlamor. And the 13th year, they rebelled. So I'm talking about these 5 cities. Now, there was other cities there, too, that paid tribute. This city paid tribute for 12 years, and finally it got tired of it. All these cities did, and they got tired of it, and they were not sending any more money. So the 14th year, Chadlamor and the kings that were with him came and defeated, and funny, they went several different places first. Now, I don't know if you know it or not, your Old Testament shows that there was 27 different Rephaim tribes in Israel. Do you understand what that means? There were 27 different tribes producing Goliaths and Nimrods. And the world got ruled once by one of them. And so when countries and stuff would hear about those things, they would either make them their champions, like Goliath for the Philistines, or since it has been so brutally ruled by a dictatorship that's actually, I mean, he's a chief tater and kills all the rest of the taters. That was Nimrod. Then, you listen and you draw your own conclusions here. The kings that were with him came, and this is before they went to war with these guys. They defeated the Rephaim and Ashtaroth and Karnaim. And the Zimazin, which all these are tribes of different Rephaim that are there, and Ham. Now remember, Ham, remember who Ham was? His son was cursed because he did something really dirty to his dad. Remember? Noah put a curse on his son Canaan. And what land are we in? The land of Canaan. And that there's a city called Ham, and it had these crossover beings, and Enomim, and Shevra Kitram, and the Horites, and their Mount Seir. The Horites at Mount Sierra, Joshua went in and he cleared out that place. He said, give that to me, at El Paran, which is by the wilderness. Now, my whole point was this army is making a campaign and specifically going where the Rephaim cities are to kill the Rephaim. Now, I've never heard anybody talk about that, but it's just my little antennas went up, and well, no wonder, because the world had really been brutalized by these crossover. You remember before the flood? Before the flood, the world was filled with these creatures. And so that's why God sent the flood. They died, but the spirit that was within them, the fallen spirit, it was an eternal spirit, and it got, that's where the demonic forces come to and fro. They're looking for a body to inhabit once again. So now my point is they're making war, and they've got a fairly good army. I had a map drawn up at home of the plain of Shinar that belonged to Nimrod, and also of Elam, showing these are large areas, and they had fairly good-sized armies. Fairly good-sized armies. I would say the one in Elam was probably at 5,000 men, and he probably picked up 5,000 from each one of those. And they didn't have to carry many provisions. It was kind of eat as you go, you know. If you come up on a sheep herd, hey, look, that's lunch. Just round them all up and we'll have a barbecue. So there was always plenty to eat. That was Rome's conquest too. That was the Grecian conquest. That was the Persian conquest. We take it and we eat what they got. We don't worry whether they starve to death, and that's how they were able to do their big war campaigns. So they had also conquered all the country of the Amalekites and the Amorites who lived in Hazem Taar. And the king of Sodom and the king of Gomorrah and the kings of Adah and the king of Zolam and the king of Bela, that's Zor, came out and they arrayed for battle against them in the valley of Siddim. Are your mind oriented towards the map now? And so we probably have an army of maybe 20,000 against maybe 5,000. And we have an army that are truly army people. That's all they do. And they've come maybe 1,000 miles, some of them, maybe 500 miles, some of them, but they're army people. They're trained killers. They're trained in combat. And the 5,000 men that most likely met them, that's my number out of my head that I kind of draw from all these cities, they were more merchants and all kinds of people, but they probably had a few policemen, but not many. remember when the angels come, there was a great riot one night, and there was no police there to do anything about it. So they're not really into policing their society. It's kind of a free-for-all, do what you want society there in Sodom and Gomorrah and the rest of these cities. It's kind of the me, myself, and I land. If you wanted to go, this was a good place you'd go. They were dressed up in the same attire that they were in Ur, or if you went down to Egypt, they dressed in great robes and all these things. This is one of those places. So when they come and meet the valley of Sidon against the king Chamar, the king of Elam, and the title king of Goam, there we got the same names again. I'm going to skip all those. The 4 kings against 5. Now the valley of Sidon was full of tar pits, and Sodom and Gomorrah fled. That's the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled. And listen to this. And they fell into the tar pits. Did anybody know that? That's a real biblical thing, isn't it? Now we got a couple of whiny tar babies. The first ones. I don't know if y'all remember that little book or not. Now, the valley of Sidon was full of tar pits, and the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah fled, and they fell into them. But those who survived fled to the hill country. Well, we know who survived, and that was the king of Sodom. Why? Because he's the one that's going to meet Abraham over in another valley. It's called the Valley of Kings when on his return. And they took all the goods of Sodom and Gomorrah and all their food supply. And they also took Lot, Abraham's nephew, and his possessions and departed, for he was living in Sodom. Now, why is it always the righteous that have to rescue the unrighteous fools that are me, myself, and I? It's all about me. I'm going to do what I want, but why am I having to spend money to save you? It's all about me. Why am I having to spend money to fix your car? It's all about me, and I'm going to do what I want to do. And do you understand that? That's the pattern. And the pattern is because those who will not do it God's way cannot. It's impossible to make a right decision. And hopefully we're going to end with that. I don't have a watch up here, not that it would matter, but maybe we'll move on here. And the fugitive came and told Abraham, the Hebrew. See, the reason he was called the Hebrew is because he come from Hebron, if you ever wondered about that. Now he was living by the oaks of Mirmah, which Mirmah means strength, and the Amorite brother of Eshcol, the brother of Aner, and these were allies with Abraham. Isn't that funny? See, we have God having a relationship with Abraham. We have a whole city that has a relationship with Abraham. But he also, people in the land were allies with him. Now, I don't expect they probably had as big an army as he did. I expect they probably were really nice to him. He was on land that wasn't his. They said, well, go ahead. They weren't sheep herders and didn't care about stuff like that. It's free grass out there. And so they prospered by Abraham being there in their land. But they also realized that every year when spring comes, kings go out to war. No matter where you were in the world, as soon as the cold blew off and the mud was gone, yeah, it's time for war. Whether you go to China, whether you go to Russia, no matter where you went, every year after springtime, after things dry out, we don't want to get out there and have to wrestle in the mud. The nations would go to war. I don't think it's changed much. So he was living there. They also took Lot. We read that. Now, there's these 3 guys. Isn't it strange? There's 3 guys there in relationship that aren't men of God. They don't belong to God. But I have news for you. Nobody but Abraham belonged to God on the planet Earth. But they must have been prospective candidates, because if they were allies, they had to have an understanding that thievery is against the law, They had to have an understanding that you're supposed to be a noble creature, not an ignoble creature. Ignoble creatures always think about themselves and talk about themselves. Noble creatures are usually the ones that have to listen to the ignoble creatures. And all the baby talk they want. Oh, I did this and I did that and I'm going to do and I. And I think, how many of you are in there? I've heard 47 eyes today. So the Fuji came and told Abraham, and he was living nearby the oaks, and we read that. When Abraham heard that his relative had been taken captive, just his relative that kind of spit in his face and kind of embarrassed himself and kind of said, I'm above you, and argued. And I think it was in front of everybody. He brought a case, and the case was against Abraham. I think, what kind of, do you not have any marbles in your head? This man walks with God. But he would say, I was there too. I meet many Christians like that. They witness somebody else having a great windfall from God. And all of a sudden they assume that, well, I'm religious. Well, you can get in to know God, but you got to get rid of your religion. That's one thing Abraham did not have, is religion. He had honor, he had truth, and if God said something, yes, I will do that. He was filled with joy to do anything that God said. Matter of fact, if we could get Abraham teleported here, if he saw all the things God had to say, he would be elated. Because there's about 1 million new things that he could please God in. And he would be digging every one of those things out of how do I please him? How do I please him? And guess who would be getting more visitations than anybody else? Because he was willing and wanting to hear from God so he could do it. Now, most people don't want to hear from God except, will you come get me out of this pickle? Well, it means you've been on the wrong side of the river again. Will you come and get me out of this? Whether it be fist fight, dog and cat fight, money, whatever it is, those things are going to happen. But see, we're supposed to grow and realize, wait a minute, I'm not doing it anymore. The devil tricked me long enough. I'm not doing it his way. So we're going to get to that, hopefully. And Abraham, we read that. He divided his forces in the night and his servants and defeated them. Can you imagine that? See, he left, and we'll continue reading, then I'll make some. He divided his forces against them by night and his servants, and they defeated him, and they pursued him as far as Haboth, which was north of Damascus. Now, they actually left where he was at and headed up to Dan, which Dan was the very far north of the nation, and the very south end of the nation was down close to Egypt. And where all this took place was down close to Egypt, and the kings took off, and they're headed north. And when Abraham hears about it, he's way behind. And so they're traveling. They're traveling by night and day. And they intercept them about 30 to 50 miles north of Damascus is where they finally caught up with them. And that's a long trip. It's probably 120 miles that they were hoofing it, dragging their swords and all that stuff to catch up with an army of maybe 20,000 people. Now, I have heard some preachers make the rendition that, well, they all slept that night and they got drunk that night and they partied, and so they were just passed out, and there's these 318 men ran through and they killed most of them. Now, the book of Josephus says so great was the slaughter. There was a few that escaped, and all they did was go hide back in Assyria because of what had happened. But I don't believe they were drunk. It doesn't say they were drunk. Matter of fact, we're going to find out Melchizedek saying that your God went before you. I like that. Because God went before the children of Israel. And sometime they'd go into battle and not lose one man, and the other people would lose 20,000. I believe what Scripture says. I believe God did that. There were some places that God went before them, and he stung them to death with wasps and hornets, and then the fields full of dead bodies with thumps all over them. Probably still shaking on the ground. And God took care of it. Some places God sent hailstorms to kill all the people before the children of Israel. See, he wanted them to learn how to fight, and learn how to kill the enemy, and learn how to drive it out. And it's an example to us that, yes, God will deal with some of our flesh and some of our demonic forces by going before us. But we have to get hold of the sword of the Spirit, and we have to get on the shield of truth, and we have to gird up with a belt of truth. We have to put on the armor, and all of life is a fight. There's no relaxation. You're fighting for your life to get out of this life with God. You're fighting not to be one of the reprobate people. We're fighting for our sanity. We're fighting for truth. We're fighting for honor. We're fighting for things we do not have. And if you're not fighting for that and you're a lazy bumpkin, I'm sorry, you won't gain the character that you need to have meetings with your God. And why shouldn't he expect that if he's going before you? Why shouldn't he expect that if he comes and willing to visit you with the Spirit and get you off your lazy torso? So let's go work out. Let's go do this. And how you do that? Well, I made kind of a shallow turn that somebody behind me didn't like, and they got about that far from my bumper and laying on the horn, and Jackie's eyes are great big. And this was that yesterday? Yeah, it wasn't today. It was a long time ago. And I'm having to stop short because the vehicle in front of me is getting on the freeway there at College Way and I-5. And so the truck in front of me stopped, so Jackie thinks I just slammed on my brakes. She says, "Don't do that." And I'm looking at the bumper of this other truck in front of me, and meanwhile the guy's laid over on his horn, and he's run, he wants to, and am I going to get upset? Yeah, I have a choice. I can put on my suit of nobility. I did speed up so he couldn't get in front of me, because people like to get in front of you, slam on the brakes. Payback, right? But I just sped up so that he didn't want to get in between me and the car, so he'd go on, and he did. He was raving. In my spirit, I'm headed out to the boat, and I'm thinking about the water and thinking about our little seals that we have. We have a special dock for baby seals now. It's the only one out there. I was thinking about some of those things and some of the things I was going to do, and so my mind wasn't captured, and I didn't have to do war, although I was tempted. We're constantly looking at a fight. Either we can make it with others or we can fight off our flesh. If we fight off our flesh, now we'll walk away in peace and joy. And might even get a compliment from your spouse of saying, "I'm so proud of you." Now, I don't know how to take that. Jackie told me that when we were at that oil place with the oil Nazi guy. She said, "I was so proud of you." I didn't know whether to be mad about that comment. Although I decided, no, I'm not going to get mad about that comment. Because see, that means I'm down here. And I made it finally in her eyes, right? So Abraham, with 322 people. Now, I realize he had 318. But there was him. How many is that? 319? And then his three friends. Now we're up to 322. I like numbers. Sometimes they're not too accurate, I'm afraid. So he brings back all the goods. Now, keep in mind, Sodom and Gomorrah were considered rich cities because of the camel trades that come through there, the salt that was there, their promiscuity. It would have probably been one of the first trans towns. It was on the Trans Am Highway. Because there was some weird stuff going there. And people always like weird stuff, especially when it comes to having devils around and fallen angels and demon forces. And we got a whole bunch of lunatics that run around and, looking for that kind of stuff. And you would have found it in this place. They were trying to raise up the Nephilim again by having sex with angels. And I'm saying that because it says that we'll find out in a later lesson that they desired strange flesh, and it talks about that they didn't want human flesh, and that's the way the Raphaim were made, was humans doing that. Let's get back to tonight's study. He brought back all the goods, also brought back relative Lot with his possessions, and also the women and the people. Now, see, women were a very important commodity back then. It's listed along with the wealth, is it not? See? I'm funning, but after his return from his defeat, Chedorlaomer, the king who were with him, the king of Sodom went out to meet him. Remember, he fell in a tar pit, and he went up in the hill country, and so I'm assuming he's one. The valley of Shiva, that's a king's valley. There's a Shiva valley that if you go on the eastern side of the mountains and go north of Jericho, you go across the Jordan and you're up in the Arabic country now, but there was some mountains up there. Matter of fact, Absalom was hung in one of the forests. He got his hair cut or hung in one of those trees. Well, not too far from that is this valley that is called the Shiva Valley, and it's called the King's Valley. And I don't know why. There's no cities around it. There's no nothing around it. There's no big implements like in Egypt. There's a place called King's Valley. It's because they buried kings there. But this is called the King's Valley. And Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now, he was a priest of God Most High. And he blessed him and said, "Blessed be Abram of God Most High." Wow, God has a claim on him. Abram of God Most High. Are you Charlie of God Most High? Are you Nancy of God Most High? Are you Rachel of God Most High? Are you Yesenia of God Most High? Are you Cynthia of God Most High? Are you Patty of God Most High? You see, I don't think we think in right circles. We think we're here on earth, but this Melchizedek, he's God's priest. I have heard some fools preach that there was Jerusalem was there. No, it wasn't. Hittite baby murdering, offering sacrifices to other gods that were there where Jerusalem was. Jerusalem, the city of peace, was not there. It was occupied by people who worshiped other gods. Jerusalem was established later on. At this time, it was full of Hittites and full of moon god worshippers and full of Baal worshippers that offered children as sacrifices. So, but I've heard fools get up there, call themselves pastors, and preach. Well, he was a priest for God there at that city. And that's false. Matter of fact, we're so false because it's saying that he was the priest of God, the God of heaven. He was the priest of God in heaven. In heaven. And now he's on a mission down here on earth. And he has an encounter with the first one of faith. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now he was a priest of God Most High. He blessed him. Now, see, this was not a man. This was God standing there giving God's blessing on Abraham, saying, "Abraham of God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be God Most High." Now he's praising God. who has delivered your enemies into your hands. I heard one pastor, I think a lot of, say, well, they were all drunk, and it was just kind of a natural thing, and while they were inebriated, they beat them up. That was the term, and I thought, they didn't beat them up, they killed the snot out of them. And if you didn't, they'd be back. Who delivered your enemies into your hands. See, I 100% believe that. God delivered an army, in my mind, and it may be too small that I'm estimating. He delivered 20,000, in my opinion, into the hands of 318 men. To the point, Josephus says that there were very few that escaped, and those who did escape were terrified for the rest of their life. They went running back half naked and hid and didn't tell anybody what they were up to. They were afraid that God made them so afraid. They were afraid that God was going to still come after them. I think that's the right perspective, because God's in this. This is not a natural thing. This is a supernatural thing, and that's what God is trying to show us. He's a supernatural God, and He's not going to fight our battles for us. We're supposed to fight His battles for Him. And one of His battles He once fought, it will go save this reprobate kid, so I can get a good history record. You realize most of the things that happened were for a good history record. You know, like when they went down to Egypt and the king comes out and gets a 74-year-old woman that looks 20, and he's hot for her, and God gives him a dream, I'm going to kill you. And I heard a lot of people say, well, you know, Abraham lied. No, he didn't. It was his sister. Who told him to say that so it could be written in the book? Who told him to go to Egypt so we would have the story? Yeah, I believe what God does is right. And if His servant walked with Him, God also walked into Egypt with him. Because it also had to be established. He said, wherever you put your foot, I'm going to give you that land. The land of Goshen was in Egypt. He had to go there in order for that land to become part of Israel. I don't know if you've seen some of the signs of, it's from the river Nile. Matter of fact, God's going to say that. I'm going to give you from the river Nile. And you think God gave up the Nile when He said that? All the way to the river Euphrates. You think He gave up the Euphrates to the other side? Water's a really important thing. He said, that's what He promises after these things take place. And He blessed God Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hand, and all of a sudden, Abraham takes a tenth of everything that's there, and he gives it to Melchizedek. It's called a tithe. Matter of fact, it's a tenth. This is the first place we see about tithe and tithing. As a matter of fact, it will go on even to tie it straight to the tithe, because we'll find out in Hebrews more about that. So the king of Sodom said to Abraham, give the people to me and take the goods for yourselves. Now, where did this Mickey Mouse get off? He took off running. All he wants is the people for them to serve him and make him king. You can't be a king unless you have people. Right? And so he all of a sudden he shows up. He hears that there was a great rout, and he shows up in his robes, and he says, okay, Abraham, you just keep the stuff. But before he shows up, who else showed up? Melchizedek did. And Abraham got mad. He got mad. Why? Because Abraham shows up, sits down, he brings bread and wine, and they're having communion. And after they're having communion, there was a conversation that went on there, and we'll see if we can catch some of the air of that conversation. You ready for it? He said, give me the people, and you take the goods for yourself. Abraham explodes and says to the king, I've sworn to the Lord God Most High, possessor of heaven and earth, that I would not take a thread or even a sandal or a thong or anything that's yours, for fear you would say, I have made Abraham rich. Now see, God wanted to make sure there was a test right here. Abraham probably could acquire, I would say, at least 1,000 to 2,000 pounds of gold. You realize how many cities these people went through and stripped? And they know when they took a city, they would find out who had the gold. And if you wouldn't confess that you had it, you died. So people would be pulling that stuff out of their pockets. And then I'd say, you know anybody else that's got any? No. Are you sure? I'm going to kill you if you don't. Yeah, that guy over there. and you know, they were weak-minded people back then and still are. But see, God wanted to make it a point. I'm the one that gave Abraham his riches. And Satan would have got to make a point that, well, he went up and naturally fought this army and naturally overcome them. And they were small. They were probably 200. You didn't travel in small numbers back then, especially when the big armies went out to fight. And so Abraham, he's declaring what God declared to him. Abraham, I'm the one that's made you rich. And that reprobate's going to show up here in a few minutes, and he's going to try to get you to give something to him, to get you to reason with him. But the whole devil's scheme behind it is so when I write the Bible, men will say the king of Sodom is the one that made Abraham rich. And so he blows up about it because, see, he had to have that information or he wouldn't have blown up about it. Would you agree with me about that? Now, a lot of that's speculation on my part, but it's speculation based upon his responses and also on what he had to say. So then he said, I'll take nothing except what the young men have eaten and shares of the men who went with me. And Aner and Ishkal. Ishkal, by the way, is a valley of Ishkal. You remember when the Israelites sent the spies in and the two guys brought a thing of grapes that were hanging nearly to the ground? It was in the valley of Ishkal that they got that. And let them take their share. Now, I'd like to skip over to, nope, that's not it. See if that's it. Yeah. Now, let's read some things about Melchizedek, and then maybe I can tie those things together right quick in the next 32 seconds. Melchizedek, king of Salem, brought out bread and wine. Now, he was a priest of God Most High. Psalms 104, the Lord has sworn and will not change his mind. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. Then in Hebrews 5 and 6, just as he says also in another passage, he's speaking in the New Testament now, you're a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. Are you getting, he's talking about Jesus? Guess who was there to take the first tithe? Jesus. Matter of fact, we see him also show up from Joshua. Remember? An angel shows up. He's got his sword drawn. And Joshua draws his sword and comes running. He says, who are you for? Are you for us or are you for them? And, well, stupid, I'm not for either one. I'm for God. Who are you for? And he said, who are you? I am the captain of the host of God's warriors, his angels. And he fell down and worshipped him. If it had been an angel, all angels will prevent you from worshiping him. So who was that? He was the captain of the host of God. So we have any different appearances of Jesus back then. Hebrews 5:10, being designated by God as high priest according to the order of Melchizedek. See, Jesus was designated as a high priest, but he had already served that. Remember, he's not in a time zone. In Hebrews 6:20, When Jesus entered as a forerunner for us, having become the high priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. I'm saying this so that you get an understanding. I truly believe that was just Jesus. But he's in a different order. He's doing the Father. But remember, he blessed. An angel can't bless. Jesus can. And he's declaring it to God. Then he turns right around and says, "Blessed be God." I just wish he would have added, "My Father." For he was still, this is again talking about tithe, for he still, in the loins of his father, when Melchizedek met him, that's he's talking about the tithe. Yeah, let's read that whole thing. For Melchizedek, king of Salem, priest of the Most High God, who met Abraham as he was returning from the slaughter of kings, blessed him, for he was still in the loins of his father. He's talking about Levi, I think. Did I read that in there? Let's go on here. Hebrews chapter 7. Now, if perfection was through the Levitical priesthood, for on the basis of it the people received the law, what further need was there for any priest to arise according to the order of Melchizedek, and not be designated according to the order of Aaron? See, I'm setting you up here for something, and this is clearer still. If another priest arises according to the likeness of Melchizedek, that's in 15, in 17, again, Hebrews 7:17, for it is attested of him, you are a priest forever according to the order of Melchizedek. The reason I want to bring in Melchizedek, if we look over in Galatians and Romans, I don't have time, it says that we were engrafted into Abraham if we will be in Jesus. And so the promises to Abraham was, I'm going to be your God. I'm going to be with you. The promises to him were to him and his seed that were by faith. Faith that he had is just as simple as it can be. Got real complicated when the law was given. Now people would say you're supposed to live by the law. Those people didn't live by faith, they lived by the law. But those who kept the law kept it by faith. Do you understand that statement? Those who couldn't keep the law didn't have faith and trust in God. Now, Abraham was faced with the same dilemma we are. Either we're going to fall to temptation, because the king of Sodom represents Satan. He's going to come in and offer you something to get you to compromise, to get you to give up the blessing. Jesus was standing there as God's priest, as a sovereign priest who stood before God, as the one who was interceding for Abraham, as the one, and he said, now, when this guy comes, you don't take nothing he's got. So he was faced with this plan of, am I going to be sucker punched by Satan because I can get even richer out of this? There's all kinds of, I'm going to get even, or I'm going to get rich, or I'm going to get ahead. And we want to shortcut what God has said and what we know he has said. By shortcutting it, we're accepting the terms of Sodom. That, okay, yeah, you can keep the riches. No, we don't want anything. Anything of ill-gotten gain will bring destruction in your life. And if you have ill-gotten gain, and that's not that you went out and held up a bank. How about you stole something from God? You know, how long you been a Christian? 5 years? Well, the last 5 years, have you stolen anything from God? Did you not give him his part? Last 10 years, 15 years. You know, oh, well, it doesn't matter. He forgave that. Well, was it after you got saved? He's willing to, but that's another story. My point is, every day we face the king of Sodom coming to us. Will you take a shortcut so you can get what you want? Or will you truly believe that God is going to continue to bless you and that you don't need that? See, Abraham proved, I truly believe I don't need that. Matter of fact, he got mad about it. I'm not touching nothing, not even a Nike tennis shoe. So he faced down Satan. And so this whole thing was set in there, one, to show us if there's battles to be fought, we need God involved. Because the enemy always has greater armies than we have. But Abraham was not afraid because God was his father. I got one more reading, if we can get back to it. After he says this, he said, after these things, the word of the Lord came to Abraham in a vision, saying, do not fear, Abraham. I am a shield to you. Your reward shall be very great. And of course, we know he goes on, and God tells him, I'm going to give you an offspring. It's an amazing thing to have an offspring, but it's an amazing thing to have. It was more amazing to me that Abraham had a God than he had an offspring. It's more amazing to me that Abraham would be so set in his heart that he would leave Ur and go to Haran. He would leave Haran and go to a land to live in a tent. Now, I love tent camping, but I have to tell you, I'm not sure I want to live in one. He lived in one. His whole life, he lived in a tent. His whole life, he walked with God after he was 75. But he was tempted, like we are, to take the shortcuts. He was tempted that he could get ahead doing the shortcuts. But he had such a dedicatedness to God that he believed God was his provider. He believed God when he said, I will bless you. He had the evidence of that. I ask you, do you have the evidence in your life right now that God has continually blessed you since you've become faithful and started walking with him? Raise your hand. Then when the devil comes to you and says, well, and it's one of those compromising deals. Are we going to stand with Jesus, or are we going to accept the compromise? That was the whole point of God raising up this significant character. It's not so he could say, see there, here's what a man of God looks like. He said, see there, he chose me. That was all he had to do, is choose me in every circumstance, in every way. And I count that as faith. So that's why we study the book, to see what God says, so that our heart can be delighted about doing it his way. Now, if you're concerned about your flesh, well, what if this doesn't work out? And what if that doesn't work out? And if the speculators come, how many of you have speculators live in your head? Huh? After the Civil War, they were called carpetbaggers. But you got a war going on inside. It's the Civil War. And there's lots of carpetbaggers, and they just speak and speak and speak, and they don't ever say the truth. They always try to get you into a position that you'll compromise to be able to get the last word in. See, I was threatened that I wanted to honk my horn back. I mean, the guy was laying on it, even when he's passing me. He's at 3-minute leg. And I'm sure there was arms flailing and all that. How did the guy honk his horn and have the arms flailing? I was so tempted. Just one honk. Nope. Just one smirk. Nope. Just one wave. Nope. Going out to see the baby seals. Little Rascal. We got a new one called Rascal. I want peace. This king, Melchizedek, he had no father, he had no mother, no genealogy. This is what Scripture says about him. He was not born. He's an eternal creature with no beginning, and he was there in the beginning. There's only 3 that I know of that be true about. And Melchizedek was Jesus, showing how Abraham would respond to him and how Abraham cared about nothing on this earth except God. Now, I find it an interesting thing. There have been all kinds of artifacts collected, I'm sure. Most of the real treasured things were little gold made into gods, right? Or silver made into gods. I mean, I realize the poor people made them out of wood, Or the real poor people probably use dirt, mud ball. It's my God. My whole point being is, how did Melchizedek receive the sacrifice, and how did he transfer it from earth into heaven for it to be accepted by God? Food for thought for you. But my God is plenty capable of that. There must have been something in there that he wanted. And it wasn't riches. He could make gold. It was something maybe he wanted off the face of the earth. Something maybe he wanted out of the clutches of men. Because all the places that were being attacked had the Raphamine in them, and they had all kinds of writings about how to produce the Raphamine. How to crossbreed with fallen angels to produce the Raphamine. The same creatures of darkness. So I suspect this is my curiosity and speculation that some of those things were given as tithe to God, and he got rid of them. What did he do? He took them to heaven and burned them. Or, since hell was just right over there, maybe he tossed them in that fire. But these are my speculatory thoughts of why he received something. But he literally received it, and it was not a spiritual thing. It was a physical thing. And since he was God's priest, the sacrifice had to be given and taken up there to God. Now, I realize I'll probably get lots of letters about this silliness, but on the other hand, I like to think how great my God is and how much he interacts here on earth, and anything he does is beyond my comprehension, beyond my understanding. And I want to be like Abraham and get right in the devil's face the next time he honks at me and said, my Jesus said, I am not to honk back. My Jesus said, no smiley faces, no gestures of any kind. My Jesus said, I'm to have noble character and ignore you, devil. My Jesus said, I'm not supposed to have my way. My Jesus said, do you get it? That's what Abraham did, because Jesus came and sat down with bread and wine. And I hope as we begin our worship that you will sit down with Jesus and take some bread and wine. And I hope it builds you up enough that when you go and you face all the things of this life, that you'll speak those things to yourself, so you'll stop engaging with the devil and say, no, I made a pact with my Jesus that I would not receive anything through my old man and through my flesh and through my will. I refuse to, in the name of Jesus. Shall we worship?
we declare all we want is you, Father. Come and meet us here in this place as we worship and bow down to know you.
My little ones, I don't ask you to do great things as men define them. I have asked you to listen to my words, to heed them, to believe me when I speak, to hear when I speak, to listen and to obey. I ask you to be a doer. For by my definition, those are the great things. Now men will come along and say, oh, they're so hard to do. And I say to you, it is simple. If you do those simple things every day, then you are accomplishing in me great things. And I will be great. And I will be glorified. So heed what I have to say, and do, hear and listen, and do.
If you believe this is a word from the Lord, would you raise your hand, please? Lord, we thank you. Thank you that you speak to us so liberally, so graciously.
you. hear our cry. Just hear our cries. We want to see you, Lord, know you, Lord. Not so we can believe. Because our desire for you is so great. Just want to know you. Love you, Lord. Your mercy never fails me. My days held in your hands from the moment that I wake up till I lay my head. I will sing of the goodness of God. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. I love your voice. You've led me through the fire, darkest night. You're close like no other. I've known you as a father. I've known you as a friend. And I have lived in the goodness of God. All my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. My life laid down and surrender now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. With my life laid down, I surrender it now. I give you everything. Your goodness is running after, it's running after me. And all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, I will sing of the goodness of God. 'Cause all my life you have been faithful. And all my life you have been so, so good. With every breath that I am able, oh, I will sing of the goodness of God. Yes, I will sing of the goodness of God. Oh, I will sing of the goodness of God.
want to give you a couple of minutes. How many are being impacted by seeing what faith is, what truth is, how Abraham did these things, what God was doing? Yeah? I don't know. It's really near and dear to my heart. And I got a million other things I could speak about, but we'd be here 2.5, 3 hours, something like that. But trying to got one volunteer. There you go. Yeah. So I want to give you a second or a minute or two to, if you have a comment, if you have a revelation on truth, to give you a chance to express that. Anyone?
There is absolutely no reasoning, nor understanding, nor logicalness, nor anything that can get you the outcome as trusting and being in the Lord and just casting down any type of reasoning.
I just really loved how Melchizedek said that Abram was a man of the God Most High, and it's just something for us to aspire to. You know, as you named everybody, I was going, name me too, but I know, But anyway, I'm aspiring to that.
Just how much we don't realize what we could lose each time we compromise. We're not aware of what the Lord, how He would have blessed us when we do that compromise. And so just no more compromises.
Yeah. Anybody else? Last call. Nancy over here.
You know, I have heard that Melchizedek was Christ, and I believed that. But tonight, it made it fresh and new, and it brought it out in a different way. And especially when you said, whatever the tenth was that he gave, we don't know, but God took care of it, whether it was physical, spiritual, or whatever. He could do that. He's God. Yeah.
Last call. I know there's one more. Who is it? Thank you. Did Abraham select God, or did God select Abraham? Did Abraham choose to meet with Melchizedek, or did Melchizedek choose to meet with Abraham? The question was, did Melchizedek choose to meet with Abraham, or did Abraham choose to meet with Melchizedek? Melchizedek's the one that chose to meet with Abraham. God chose. Do you realize the same Jesus that was standing there and the same God, He chose you? You can believe that of Abraham. Will you please believe that of you? He chose you. He came and got you. He's teaching you. He's raising you. He's letting you ride on his back. We have one little seal that was born this week. He rides on his mommy's back, you know. This cute little thing. His mommy's going to take care of him, and he has no question about that. My point is if you're in Jesus, then Jesus came after you. Was he successful in coming after Abraham? Do you think he'll be successful in coming after you? Remember, he never starts anything he can't finish. And he tests people. You've passed your test. You're still sitting here. You test others, and well, that's too hard. I don't want to give up whatever I'm doing. And God says, well, go on then. I'm all for that. I don't want to herd goats. I want to herd sheep, and you are his sheep. And my point is God came after Abraham. Jesus came after Abraham. God came after you, then he sent his son after you. He's very successful. All we do is just, thank you, Lord. I believe you and I'm following you. Isn't that simple? That's called faith. Nothing less, nothing more. Amen? You are dismissed, and I love you, love you, love you. We have a Friday night movie. Is that correct? This Friday night. And I got a question for you. How many of you have 4th of July planned? Or not 4th of July. Labor Day. One of those holidays. How many of you have Labor Day plans? Raise your hand, please. It's on September 2nd, 4th, something like that. Okay. Who else? You guys and Cynthia? Y'all are... Raise your hands. That's what I'm wanting to see. Okay. Anyone else? Now, I know we're probably going to have a hamburger fry, but I know Gary offered to have a tent camp out or whatever out at his house. You know, I don't know if there's going to be enough of us to cordially do that. But we might do the hamburger fry. Hello?